Okay, today, looking at the long-term causes of the Civil War, everything that happens before the war actually begins is kind of where we're going to start today. The ideas of the North and the South. We're going to go back and talk about sectionalism. Again, the differences between the North and the South. And then we're going to also look at the compromises that tried to appease both sides for a period of time. Federalism, a system of multiple governments in order to give more localized decision making. Southern states believe that it is their right or a state's right to choose whether or not they are a slave state or a free state. And they believe that because of the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment says all powers not given to the federal government are reserved for the states and the people. At that point in time, there was nothing in the Constitution about slavery. So Southerners say, or Southern states say, there's nothing in the Constitution, and the 10th Amendment says anything not in the Constitution is automatically reserved and given to the states. So they believe that that gives them the right to decide as a state whether or not they are a slave state or a free state. Okay, so this is their idea. This is how they justify their idea, is that this is a state's right because there is nothing in the Constitution talking about slavery at that point in time. The debate over slavery, pro-slavery versus anti-slavery versus opposed to growth of slavery. Pro-slavery, obviously people that are for slavery. The South, they believe that it is a necessary evil. We've talked about that before. That it's the only way that their agriculture lifestyle can be sustained. Anti-slavery obviously believe that it is morally wrong, that they go back to the Declaration of Independence, all men are created equal, and so on. Oppose the growth of slavery. This is an idea that a lot more people believe in than we ever talk about in history. The fact that a lot of people said, you know what, we probably can't stop it where it's already started, but as new territories become states, we need to stop it from expanding into these new states, and that is going to grow. And actually, when Abraham Lincoln becomes the president, that is his stance at the beginning, is opposing the growth of slavery. Remember this idea of nullification. The fact that if a state believes a law is unconstitutional, that they do not have to, that they can nullify it, declare it unconstitutional, and move on. Now remember, the Supreme Court is the only branch of the government that can interpret laws, but the South wants to use this idea of nullification again in case the North passes any laws that were to hinder slavery. Sectionalism. Remember, we talked about this before. Issues become more and more regional in nature. Remember, the North and the South, even though they're in the same country, even though they're not that far away, they are becoming very different. The industrial North, the factory system that's being set up in the North, the commerce trade that's being set up in the North versus the agriculture, huge plantation farms, agriculture South. On the tariff, the idea of tariffs, remember again, they're going to fight against this both ways. The North, who is making the finished good, wants a high tariff because they want their good to be cheaper. Remember, the South, who is not making any finished goods, has to buy all their finished goods from someone else, wants whatever is the cheapest. So by putting this tariff, this tax on goods coming in from Britain, France, or wherever, you are making those goods more expensive, and the South does not like that. The Compromise of 1820, remember we've talked about it before. If you look to your right here on the map, the Compromise of 1820 drew a line actually below Missouri and stated that any territory that became a state north of the line would be a free state. Any territory that became a state south of the line would be a slave state. And this does help solve the debate for about 20 years. Remember, I've told you before, this was putting a Band-Aid on a much bigger problem. But this kind of appeases both sides for a period of time. The next compromise is going to come about in 1850 when California decides to become a state. Remember, California grows much faster than any other territory because of the gold rush. So a couple things happen here. The Wilmot Proviso tried to block slavery in all Mexican areas that we gained from the Mexican War. So California, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, they wanted all that territory to be free land, no slavery allowed. That is obviously defeated in Congress because, remember, you have as many slave states as free states, so they could vote that down. California applies to become a state, and here is the compromise of 1850. It basically allows California to be admitted to the United States as a free state, but the South gets a stronger fugitive slave law, which we will talk about in a minute. The last thing on the slide here, popular sovereignty to help decide the future cases of slavery. Basically, this says that the people of the state will vote on whether or not their state will become a slave state or a free state. And we're going to see the problems that that causes later. The Underground Railroad. First, let me go ahead and say it was not a railroad underground, which you would be surprised how many kids think that. It was a network of anti-slavery advocates, or people who were against slavery, who helped slaves escape from the South and get to the North. So they call it underground because it wasn't spoke about, because then people would find out who was helping the slaves. So it was basically a trail from house to house, place to place, until a slave got north of Virginia. Sometimes they had to get as far as Canada to actually be free. Known as the greatest conductor of the Underground Railroad, Harriet Tubman, who helped hundreds of slaves get north using the Underground Railroad. Now, the last thing on today's notes, the Fugitive Slave Law. Remember, this is what the South gets in the Compromise of 1850. The North got California as a free state. The South got a stronger fugitive slave law. Now, here's what they got. It allowed slave catchers. So if a slave owner knew he had a slave run away, he could pay someone to go north into free areas and capture that runaway slave. That was new. Before, he could only go as far as the farthest north slave state. It also made it a crime to help a runaway, so anybody now working with the Underground Railroad could be arrested and charged with a crime. So hopefully, what the South thinks is hopefully this will deter people from helping runaway slaves. Last, suspected slaves did not have to be given a trial or a chance to testify, so they could not tell their story to anyone. Usually, runaway slave was usually brought back to the plantation and executed in front of the other slaves to scare them into not running themselves.